to flip back for a second. So make sure, if you are absent from class today, this is our work for this evening. Just making sure that we are done and ready for the math journal check. So we have talked about, and you should have in your equation sheet, and by the way, I'm reviewing this because the mastery tomorrow, so please pay attention. You should have the equation part equals percent times whole, and percent, you may or may not have the whole divide by 100 because it's the decimal form of the percent. So check your equations page. Do you have that one? If not, get it on. The next equation that you should already have on your paper is that percent is found by doing the part divided by the whole, and then to actually put it into percent form, we follow that with a multiplication of 100, which bumps your decimal. So like if you had 2 out of 5, you have 2 divided by 5, that would give you 0.4. You multiply by the 100, and you would get 40%. So you should already have that equation. The equation you might not have yet that we need to make sure is in here is the equation for finding the whole when given information about a part. So we are not all the way through chapter 5 yet. And when you guys work on the assessment tomorrow, it is not going to be definitive. It is just going to be a day of work on it. I may give you feedback, but I'm not going to grade that until we do all of 5.3, that work, 5.31, 5.32. Then you're going to have another day to work on the assessments. So hear me when I say you do not need to finish the test tomorrow. You're spending a day working on it. Make sense? No stress. Don't flip it. You don't even need to write NF on your paper. I assume everyone will be not finished. So if you needed to find the whole, so I would label or give this some kind of indication, finding the whole. I'm going to set up an easy problem to walk us through this to start, and then maybe we'll look at some more complicated ones. And I forget if this has been in your homework already, or if it's not in your homework till 5.3. So somebody can help me out if you recognize this. But let's say we have a fish tank. So a fish tank is 25% full. And has 12.5 gallons of water in it. How large is the fish tank? So here's the critical things you have written down. The percent that we've been given is that we're working with 25%, right? And that 25% corresponds to what? The 12.5 gallons. We have two ways we can find this. The equation I just gave you, which I'll show you in a moment, and we have another one that should be more familiar. What does percent mean? What's percent mean? Out of 100, right? So if we have 25%, we really have 25 out of 100. And I could set that equal to, so please set this up on your paper. We're making a proportion, or fraction equal to fraction. I'm going to use the other equation in a moment, but I wanted to show you this way and then the other way, and we'll get the same answer both ways. Now, I've used my percentage, and I've put it over 100 because that's what we know it means. Where would the 12.5 go in my proportion? Where would my, what do you think? Does the 12.5 relate to the 100% of the tank? Because remember, the bottom there is the total. Is the 12.5 the total gallons? It is 25% full, currently has 12.5 gallons of water. Oh, no. So it's not the whole, right? We're looking for the whole thing. We're looking for what would relate to the 100. That 12.5 should actually go on top. Because this is parts compared to whole. The tank is part of the way filled up. By the way, this is a great place to plug. I have a bunch of fish tank accessories I'm trying to get rid of. If you are a fish tank person and you want, so should I bring them to school and you guys will like take stuff home? Anyone need gravel? Because gravel's heavy. Fish tank gravel. You need fish tank gravel? It's purple. Alright, I'll bring this stuff to school and you guys can have whatever you want. I don't have a tank. Sorry. That's why I have accessories. Yeah.
So isn't 25 divided by 2 12.5?
Yes. So, this is why I said I'm going to make this easy to start. If the numbers work well together, like Alan just recognized, this is division by 2. So I do the same thing on bottom, and what is the amount of water that can fit in the whole tank? Patrick?
We guess, but I'm going to go 50.
50. Now the numbers don't always work out nice, though. So I'm going to give you another one that has to use the other equation because proportion would be kind of messy, complicated. Let's say we have, should have thought this out. Say we are going to a museum that you guys won't see. But you should all go to Chicago. Get your parents to take you to Chicago, or at some point when you're old enough to drive, go to Chicago. In Chicago, there is a Tesla coil. If you don't know what one is, look it up. It like makes electricity. It makes lightning. There's a Tesla coil that's like the size of this room. And let's say that we compare that to the Tesla coil that my high school physics teacher had, which is essentially where you take copper. Well, don't quote me. You take some kind of metal. I forget. Pass it through a copper wire, like coil, and as it passes through, electrons move, and that creates electricity. So let's say that our model, or like we have something smaller than the real. I need to delete that. Sorry, I know that sometimes that makes what I'm writing complicated. I need to delete that. Let's say Mr. S, my high school physics teacher was Mr. Stockdale, one of the best teachers I've ever had. So you guys don't have to write the whole problem, but Mr. S has a Tesla coil, I'll abbreviate that, that is 4.7% of the museum. How do you spell museum? Is it M-U-S-E-A-U? Okay, we'll just do that. Sorry, not giant one like CPM. So this big Tesla coil, right? It's like, you gotta go, I'll try to pull up a video. It literally makes lightning above you. Like you're laying there, there's lightning right above you. So what you need to know is we're working with 4.7%. So please write down 4.7%. We also know that Mr. S's, or I don't think I need the second S. This isn't going to come out right, probably. This won't come out right. I would need to change that percentage. Actually, let's just make, you probably haven't written this down. Let's make Mr. Stockdale's Tesla coil bigger. It was probably 14 inches wide. Sorry. Which one's bigger? Which one's the whole? Mr. Stockdale's Tesla coil or the one in the museum? The one in the museum, right? So we're going to compare. If Mr. Stockdale's is 4.7%, we could, don't do this. We could set up 4.7 over 100, set up, okay, Stockdale's is 4. How do I go from here? And I'm going to, that's awkward, right? The other way that will always work is our equation to find a whole. To find a whole, and actually I can compare this back to the equations that you already have. If part equals percent times whole. I'm going to clean that up. If part equals percent times whole. And I want to get the whole by itself. Anyone know how to do that? Yes or no? That was up in the
I've
air.
made a guess.
Take a guess.
Percent times part.
Percent times part? Close. How is the whole here attached with percent? Multiply. What's the opposite of multiplication? Anyway? Division. Here, we can divide by the percent to get rid of it and cancel it, and we divide by the percent. So the equation you need to actually write down is that to find the whole of something, we just take the parts, like the partial amount that we've been given, divided by the percent in decimal form. We're always working in decimal form with the percent.
Could I have Eleanor DeMartini to the office, please? Eleanor?
So here, to find the giant Tesla coil, what was our part? What is Mr. Stockdale's Tesla coil? Alex? 14 inches. To go from percent to decimal. This is another skill you want to kind of reinforce before the mastery tomorrow. You have to divide by 100, right? Percent means out of 100. So our percent here is 4.7. You take 4.7 off to the side, divide it by 100. It bumps your decimal left by 2 places. So if you remember percent means divide by 100, you can just use your calculator if you need to. So we get 0.047. Somebody with a calculator, calculate that for us. What?
Someone put a bunch of stuff in here. It's
You can just hit clear at the top.
it's
Sure.
my thing says like
14 divided by 0.047.
297.8723
Guys, I told you, it's a giant Tesla. I don't even think that's big enough because I just made these measurements up out of thin air. That's probably not even quite big enough because if we take that, so about 300 divided by 12, that'd be 20. Yeah, that's probably actually close because that's 25 feet. So this giant Tesla coil is probably about 25 feet across. So I just want, whether or not you use that method, and I'll show again the other method with the proportion. It's not as like clean, it's not as easy, but it does the exact same thing. So are we? I'm actually gonna, can I copy this whole thing? Maybe? Why did you break it so far up? Using a proportion. You don't have to write this if you don't want to. Using a proportion, percent means out of 100. Was the 14 part or whole? Part, right? It's the smaller one. It's not the bigger one, it's the smaller one. So we put that on top. If I don't know how to multiply it, I have no idea. That's 4.7. That's gross. What do I do to figure out the multiplication? Yeah, if I don't know how to multiply that way, I divide that way. Everybody needs to put eyes on this. Make sure you're aware of that. You're going to need that info on the test. To solve a proportion, we don't know how to multiply this way. We divide that way. So 14 divided by 4.7 gives us what?
2.978723
Times 2.987. Man, if I was nice, I would have just made that times 3. But decimals don't work out like that. So that's messy, but it will still work. When I do this multiplication to match what the top did, we get 298.7. Now, some of you might think this method's easier. I actually think that method's easier. Because I don't have to remember a formula. I don't have to make sure I set it up right. I just know part over whole. Part over whole. Now, we got a half hour left. Any questions from any of Chapter 5 that you want me to field on the board? Stick up a hand and we can do that. Any question you want to talk with your partner about? Totally fine. This time is yours unless you want Mr. Smith or I helping you to solve something. I'm also really quickly going to show you the test. Might as well, so you know what you are going to need to do. And then you'll understand why I emphasized finding the part so much. No, not Word. Don't open that. Word stinks on my computer. Google is taking over the world. My Word has stopped working. Other classes do this, right? I'm not crazy to show you the test.
I mean, I got yours early.
Here's the deal. I want you to know what you're going to be asked to do, right? It's pointless if I ask you to do something and you're not ready. So, finding the whole, what we just talked about, on number 1, it tells you that this piece of wood is this percentage of the larger, yeah, I cut my finger. How long is the longer piece of wood? You're finding the whole. Question 2, talking about the Louisville Slugger Museum. Again, you have measurement or amounts given to you. It says the world's biggest bat is 68,000 pounds, is an exact scale replica of Babe Ruth's bat. What if Babe Ruth's bat is 2.4% of the world's biggest bat? How tall? So you're answering again, percent, part, whole, what pieces do you have? What are you solving? Again, talking about baseball, I like that they relate all these things. There is I'm trying to get this focus. So jumping through the info, just the problem setup. If a standard baseball is 2.9 inches across and is also 2.4% of the giant baseball down the street, what is the giant baseball's distance across? Notice anything that's the same in all 3 of these problems? Alan?
Well, they all have 2.4.
Yeah, they all use 2.4%. So if you get comfortable solving it in one step, setting up the proportion, working with it, you should be able to apply that to the other problem. All 3 of these problems are essentially one problem. It's the same skill set. It's just asking you 3 different things about that. Question 4 is another help people out sort of thing. We gotta get Leonard to Leopold, to calm down. I always forget the names they're using. So they're drawing beans. We're moving into probability with this question. So they found the probability of red. They actually found the wrong thing. You have to help them figure out the probability they were actually asked for. Anyone ever go to Mongolian barbecue? So they have to change the name, right? So they couldn't say Beatty's. At Marty's Mongolian barbecue, you have to calculate how many total possible options there are. So if you've ever been to Mongolian barbecue, you get your bowl, you choose your thing, Remember the tree diagrams we did to talk about total possible options with the ice cream? Remember from last test, perimeter and area of a shape involving those algebra tiles? You got to remember how to do that. In my opinion, this is easier than the last one. Sometimes we back it down to see, are we mastered on the easier step? Simplifying expressions. So working with, I'll get this to focus, hopefully. Working with mixed numbers, working with like terms. What does it take to be like terms? Like, can I add the 5x and the negative 2x squared? If we look up here, are my x tiles and my x squared tiles the same thing? So think about that. Can I add things that are not the same shape? What should I do with mixed numbers before I solve?
Improper.
Impropers are always better. And then what do I need before I add or subtract? Common denominators. Percent question. What does of tell me to do? Multiply. Parentheses dealing with like working from the inside out. It's order of operations. So if you want to review order of operations tonight, that would be beneficial. Again, I do not expect you to finish this tomorrow. We're looking at growth. How much is something changing? How could we explain this relationship? Would this be proportional? And the last question. Flipping a coin. So, alright, that's that. Any homework questions that we have, I would love to field. So, if you guys can talk with each other, you can work on homework. If you're one of those people that's like, well, I've done all this and I'm ready to move on, you may try the 4-3-1 homework, but we haven't done the lesson, so you may not be able to do it all. Yeah.
I tried, but I still can't exactly figure out 551.
What lesson is that from?
5.2.
Yeah, this one is harder than even the test question, which is, I mean, you know, we want you to practice harder than what you're going to be expected to perform. On your paper, sketch algebra tiles at the right, write expressions for the area and perimeter of the shape, then work with ABC, right? So the first thing we would want to do here is figure out the perimeter and the area of it on its own.
We have to look at each individual section. Lost my smartboard pen.
How long is this section? X, right? Up here? Yeah, 1, 1, 1. Same thing down here. 1, 1, 1, 1, 1, 1. This is where we have a hard time. What would the whole height be? What is this section? So what does this become? Yeah. So we would write out on our paper that the perimeter, when I combine all of this, well, x, I only have two x's. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, minus 2. Then area, right, what's our area? Area is just all of the names, like put together with how many you have. How many x squared tiles do you have? X squared tiles? I'm asking a trick question. Sorry. There's no x squareds, right? The square tiles. There are x tiles, but those are the rectangles, right? Not the x squared, like what we just saw in the test, the actual square. So we have 3 x's. We, of course, don't need to put anything about x squared since we don't have them. Plus what? Plus 3 1s. What we're then asked to do in A, B, and C is figure out what would P equal and what would A equal, perimeter area, if X was whatever. So when X is told to us to be 9, we plug in 9 and we solve. We plug in 9 and we solve. Or you can actually look here. Okay, if this is 9, then this edge would be 9. That's 9, that's 9. These would still be like, you can actually think it all out, but you can also just plug it in and make it easier. And then we do the same thing with a half. And that gets kind of weird if you try to draw it. So plugging it in will like get you the answer more quickly. We try to think about it. These tiles, if x is a half, actually shrink smaller than the 1s. So when x is a half, this would actually look like that for each x tile. And there'd be an x there that was a half, and an x there that was a half. So, well, if my half actually looked like a half. Not very artsy. Is that good?
Other questions? We got like 15 minutes left. Or you guys can just work. I've got a lot of people just like staring at me. I don't know if you just like have nothing else to do, but you guys need to be making sure that your journals are ready for the check tomorrow and that you're ready for the test. So anything that we just looked at for the test, if you're like, look it up in your book, look it up, like grab a Chrome. Well, I don't know if we can grab Chromebooks. I think they're kind of limited today. But yeah, do whatever you need to prep for this. Out. Yeah. So that's also why today.
So who's orchestra field trip in here?
Yeah, so a couple of us. So that's also why tomorrow is just like, we're just going to work on it, but it's not, like I'm going to give you another day, probably at the end of next week. So don't worry about it, but at some point next week during AOR extensions, let's have you, I mean, if you have time today during AOR extensions, you can work on it if you want.
I might not be here tomorrow.
I mean, same thing. Just, we can take care of it next week. Like, no, I don't like high stress situations, so I've done my best to like eliminate most of those. So this test is not getting graded over the weekend. I might give you guys some feedback, like, hey, watch this, be careful about that. Low stress. Questions? Come on. 4 things you just want me to solve. The problems you thought were interesting, I'm going to see if I can do them. Test my skills. Alright, so I'm just curious, right? No, there's no pressure, nothing's on the line. If I collected math journals right now, who's good? Like, you could hand it to me right now and you'd be good. Okay, so everybody else has stuff that you can be doing right now. So let's do that. As you figure out problems that you need help on or you want to see up here, ask me and we'll make that happen. I'd like to solve more problems up here. I enjoy them. So we got about almost 15 minutes. You don't have to turn it in right now. Sorry, this is class. So nobody has to turn it in today. That is absolutely up to you. But because some people are going to be absent tomorrow, I'm going to go ahead and put the bin up here. So if you decide, oh, I'm done, I just want to get rid of it, stick it in the bin. So